So, good afternoon to everyone. As always, we're going to allow a bit more time for attendees to join before we proceed. So please bear with us and we'll just allow 1 or 2 minutes before we kick off. So we'll wait until maybe 2.5 minutes past 3, and then we'll get started. All right. So I think we're just at 2.5 minutes past 3. So I think we've allowed for enough time and we can get started. So again, good afternoon to everyone and welcome to the monthly Eurosif Sustainable Finance update. As always, we'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to attend this session. We have quite a few notable developments in the realm of sustainable finance to cover today. It's been quite a busy period in terms of regulatory developments. You may hear me from time to time giving prompts for slides to be changed. So I think with that said, I can ask Marie, could you move us on to the next slide and we'll take a quick look at our agenda for this afternoon. So today we're going to provide you with an update on the latest SFDR related developments, namely the European Commission's adoption of a delegated act endorsing the disclosure standards prepared by the European supervisory authorities, or ESAs, and also in relation to SFDR, the joint ESAs updated supervisory statement on the application of SFDR. Then we will provide you with a brief overview of the European Commission consultation on ESG ratings. That will be followed by an update on 2 reports by the Platform on Sustainable Finance. The first one concerning the extension of the taxonomy framework, and the second one on technical screening criteria for the 4 remaining environmental objectives. The final item on our agenda will be updates on the CSRD legislative process and multiple developments concerning sustainability reporting standards. As always, throughout the update, we would welcome any questions you might have. There should also be time at the end for a Q&A. So if we need to proceed with the updates, we'll revert back to your question if left unanswered at the end of the session. Finally, as always, the slides will be made available after the session today, and you or colleagues can watch this update again on our YouTube channel. So all of that will be available. So I think with all of that said, we can dive into our first agenda item. So could we change the slide, please? Perfect. So of course, yesterday, the European Commission adopted the delegated regulation consolidating the regulatory technical standards, or RTS, prepared by the European supervisory authorities into a single legal instrument. In total, there were 13 regulatory technical standards developed by the ESAs that had to be consolidated into this delegated regulation. So the delegated regulation, or the DR, I'm going to say for short, specifies the information to be disclosed by FMPs in terms of ESG risk management, ESG impacts of investments, and taxonomy alignment at product level. And the DR also contains the disclosure templates to be used. Now, according to our preliminary analysis at Eurosif, the DR does not diverge from the RTS in any significant regard. For example, the principal adverse impact indicators remain the same. The disclosure templates developed by the ESAs and the methodology to be used to determine taxonomy alignment at product level are also both unchanged. And importantly, the prohibition on the use of estimates for the purposes of taxonomy alignment disclosures also remains in place. So with the formal adoption of the DR, the European Commission has endorsed the disclosure standards developed by the ESAs and initiated the scrutiny or non-objection period, during which the European Parliament and the Council can either approve or reject the act. So the formal scrutiny period is 3 months, and it can be extended by an additional 3 months at the request of either the European Parliament or the Council. Accordingly, we can anticipate that the DR will be published in the official journal by July of this year, with the disclosure templates contained in it to be used as of 1st January 2023. Now, of course, it's important to note that theoretically, Council and Parliament could both expedite approval of this delegated regulation. They do not have to wait for the 3 months to lapse. At this juncture, though, we don't have any indication that they'll do that. And in any event, a lot of the application dates are stipulated in level 1 and level 2. So if they do so, it may not necessarily make a difference to your implementation internally. Now, one thing that it's important to note, some of you may have anticipated it in the delegated regulation, is that there is no provision for additional disclosures when it comes to taxonomy aligned natural gas and nuclear energy exposures, at least not at this point. So the Commission has indicated that ultimately, if natural gas and nuclear energy are included in the EU taxonomy, as per the complementary delegated act, additional disclosures would have to be introduced under SFDR to ensure that exposures to natural gas and nuclear energy, even when taxonomy aligned, are brought to the attention of clients. At this point, the reason these additional disclosures have not been introduced is, of course, because the complementary delegated act, including gas and nuclear in the taxonomy, has not yet actually finished its scrutiny period. And it's still uncertain as to whether it will finally be approved and adopted. So we're obviously waiting to see if that's the case. And if so, there may have to be changes introduced to this delegated regulation or to the disclosure standards in future. Also important to bear in mind that while this delegated regulation does contain the final, well, I shouldn't say final, it does contain the principal adverse impact indicators proposed by the ESAs, as per the renewed sustainable finance strategy adopted last year. The Commission has already indicated that there's probably going to be a revision of the principal adverse impact indicators over the course of this year. So people should anticipate a few changes to come, but they, we're yet to see what exactly they'll be. But I think with that, I'd be happy to open the floor and see whether there's any questions in relation to the delegated regulation. And if not, as appears to be the case, we can move on to our next item. If anyone does have a question on this point, please don't hesitate at the end of the session to bring it up. But with that, I think we can move to the next slide. All right, so remaining on SFDR for the moment, on the 25th of March, the ESAs issued an updated supervisory statement on the application of SFDR, which I'm sure many of you have read. Now, the statement does not include all that much that is new. So, as I was saying, the supervisory statement does not include all that many clarifications, which left a number of stakeholders confused as to why it was issued in the first instance. Now, apologies, I'm just having a few technical issues on my end, so just bear with me. It's my headset is acting up, but seems to be okay for the moment. So, okay. All right. Okay, I should be back. So apologies for that, everyone. But in any event, to move on, the supervisory statement reiterates that FMPs should use the draft RTS as the basis for their disclosures, pending the Commission's endorsement of the RTS through the adoption of a delegated act. Of course, we've just discussed the delegated regulation that was adopted yesterday. But of course, previously the ESAs had indicated that the RTS should be the basis for compliance with SFDR in the absence of finalized standards. Now, despite that, there are maybe two noteworthy elements in the statement that we feel are worth mentioning. First, the ESAs have specified that taxonomy-related product disclosures, which have been applicable as of January 2022, must include a precise quantification of taxonomy alignment, in addition to an explanation as to how the FMP determined those taxonomy alignment figures. Second, the ESAs have reiterated that the use of estimates of taxonomy alignment is expressly prohibited, and FMPs must obtain so-called equivalent information from the company itself or from a third party. Now, the statement was largely issued for the benefit of national supervisory authorities. The ESAs would like to ensure consistent application of SFDR provisions on taxonomy-related product disclosures, with NCAs having applied divergent approaches since these disclosure requirements came into effect in January this year. So, for instance, in some jurisdictions, FMPs have been instructed not to provide a quantification or percentage of taxonomy alignment due to doubts over the accuracy of taxonomy alignment figures at this point, while in other jurisdictions, FMPs have been told to provide precise figures of taxonomy alignment. So depending on your jurisdiction and your regulator, you will hear different guidance as to how you comply with these requirements. So of course, in response to this and wanting to avoid supervisory fragmentation, the ESAs have decided to require this quantification of taxonomy alignment. And this is despite persisting concerns over the availability and accuracy of information on taxonomy alignment from companies. So in terms of Eurosif's response, of course, we do always welcome clarification from the ESAs. However, in this instance, we've reiterated our concerns over the fact that accurate data on taxonomy alignment is not readily available from investee companies. And it will not be readily available until at least January 2023. And so probably now a lot of the figures we see being disclosed may not stand up to scrutiny. But I think with that covered off, we can see whether there has been any questions before moving on to our next item. But with that, I'll just take a look. So perhaps, very closely related to what we've just been discussing, someone has asked what would be considered valid as a third party to provide taxonomy alignment data. It's not estimates. Estimates are, of course, expressly prohibited. Instead, there is this term equivalent information. And I suppose to directly answer your question, the assumption is that it's going to be third-party data providers that provide taxonomy alignment data or taxonomy alignment figures. Now, the challenge for those third-party data providers is they cannot use proxies or estimates. Somehow, accurate data or information on the level of taxonomy alignment of a company will have to be obtained. And there's been relatively little guidance as to how this can be done. So really, at present, an investor or an FMP having to make these taxonomy related product disclosures can either engage directly with investee companies to obtain the information or rely on a third-party data provider. Either way, there's probably going to be a lot of gaps and inaccuracies. And what we are uncomfortable with at Eurosif is the fact that providing a precise figure or quantification of taxonomy alignment could potentially mislead investors or mislead clients, because potentially those figures may have to be revised as more accurate data on taxonomy alignment of companies in the portfolio becomes available. And yes, indeed, question on whether PAI indicators will be modified in the coming months, that would appear to be the case. We're expecting the Commission to send a request for technical advice to the ESAs. It's been expected now for the last few weeks, in which the Commission is going to ask the ESAs to review the PAI indicators and see whether they're fit for purpose or whether they should be revised. I think with that, we can move on to our next item. So if we could move to the next slide. So this Monday, the European Commission opened a public consultation on ESG ratings. And the Commission is consulting in order to gather information or insights on the structure and functioning of the ESG ratings market in the EU, and to identify whether there is a need for regulatory intervention. So of course, the Commission consultation comes shortly after the ESMA call for evidence on ESG ratings. And this reflects growing interest in the provision and use of ESG ratings and their role in the sustainable investment industry on the part of regulators. Interestingly, the Commission consultation appears to be largely addressed to users of ESG ratings rather than providers, although many of the questions raised in the consultation are clearly relevant for providers of ESG ratings. The consultation seeks to ascertain the use to which ESG ratings are put and what role they play in the investment process or strategy of users. How important are they when it comes to influencing or determining investment decisions, etc. More broadly, the Commission would like to assess the structure of the market for ESG ratings. In particular, they would like to determine whether there is a dependence on non-EU ESG ratings providers. As always, the Commission expresses some concern over consolidation among providers of ESG ratings and whether new entrants can penetrate the market. The consultation also raises the issue of research quality and whether there is sufficient transparency when it comes to the operations and methodologies applied by ESG ratings providers to enable the users of those ratings to conduct adequate due diligence. When it comes to potential regulatory intervention, the Commission is gathering feedback on whether there is a need for further transparency over methodologies of ratings providers, whether there is a need for clearer definitions of ESG ratings, whether there should be an authorization and registration regime for ESG ratings providers, and standards to ensure the timeliness, accuracy, and reliability of ratings. So the deadline for the submission of comments to the consultation is the 6th of June. And thereafter, the Commission will determine whether they need to prepare an initiative, either legislative or non-legislative, to address some of the issues that may or may not exist in the market for ESG ratings. But I think with that, I can open the floor, see whether there's any questions in relation to this consultation. And if not, which appears to be the case, I can pass you on to my colleague Federica for an update on the latest work of the platform. So please, Federica, go ahead.
Thank you, Hugo, and good afternoon to everybody. So let's start with the report on the extended environmental taxonomy. So end of March, the Platform on Sustainable Finance published its final report on the extended environmental taxonomy, as we know, following a first draft issued in summer 2021 and subject to public consultation. Just to remind of, the EU Commission asked technical advice to the platform in compliance with the taxonomy regulation. So what is an extended environmental taxonomy? As we know, the EU Green Taxonomy currently includes 2 levels of environmental criteria: a criteria on substantial contribution to identify activities that contribute to achieve at least one of the 6 environmental objectives of the EU, and criteria on do no significant harm, so-called, to ascertain whether activities can cause damage to any of the 6 environmental objectives. So in the proposed extended structure that you can see here in the slide, the platform recommends the Commission to extend the EU taxonomy framework and to identify 4 environmental performance areas. So one area for always significant harm with no potential improvement. And here we would have activities with currently have an unsustainable performance and cannot transition, therefore need to be shut down or decommissioned, of course, with adequate just transition measures, for example, for workers. Then we would have one area with the significant harm with potential improvement. So here we would have activities which currently have an unsustainable performance and can and are required to transition urgently, for example, by outlining a credible transition plans. So in between significant harm and substantial contribution, we would have an intermediate performance, which the platform called AMBER category, with activities meeting the do no significant harm thresholds, meaning that they don't harm the environmental objectives, but they don't meet the substantial contribution criteria. Finally, the platform has also identified low environmental impact activities, which are activities that do not have a significant environmental impact, positive or negative. So what are the key takeaways of this remarkable work of the platform? The platform itself has recognized that there are many reasons for and many reasons against extending the taxonomy, and finally considers the balance of arguments to be in favor of an extended framework. So just to summarize, for sure, an extended environmental taxonomy would address the need to increase transparency on different environmental performance. On the other hand, it would inevitably bring additional complexity to the structure of the taxonomy. So what is our point of view here at Eurosif? So we must, first of all, take into consideration that market is currently struggling with implementing the criteria for substantial contribution and do no significant harm. From recently published market analyses and exchanges we are having with market practitioners, we understand that data availability and reliability is an issue, so which might hinder the confidence of investors in using the taxonomy to assess the environmental performance of investee companies. So we need to be very cautious in adding additional layers of complexities to the system. So that said, we consider unlikely that proposal will be addressed with specific policy and regulatory actions by the Commission in the immediate future. But that, of course, is just our point of view. Now I'll hand over to my colleague Selina, who will guide you through the second report that the platform has issued end of March. To you, Selina.
Thank you, Federica, and also good afternoon from my side. So as Federica just said, the platform, or more precisely its technical working group, published a second report, which includes recommendations on the technical screening criteria for the 4 remaining environmental objectives of the EU taxonomy. So the remaining 4 environmental objectives are, after climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, listed here on the slide: sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. And the technical screening criteria, which have been developed, then help again to determine when an activity can be assessed as environmentally sustainable, or more precisely, as making a substantial contribution to the 4 remaining objectives as listed. So in this report that has been published, it's a methodological report. So as the name suggests, the report basically explains the methodological approach which was applied in defining these technical screening criteria, and then also provides a full list of all these criteria for the prioritized economic activities in its annex. So the methodological approach is quite nicely summarized in this step-by-step approach that you can see also on the left-hand side of the slide. I'll spare you to go in each step, so if you want to read more about it, feel free to have a look in the report itself. But maybe more relevant is the list of prioritized economic activities which are covered by the report, and for which consequently the screening criteria have been defined in the annex. So on the right side of the slide, you can see the list of activities, among others: agriculture, forestry, and fishing, manufacturing, energy, but also, for example, transport. That said, there are some activities, or rather combinations of activities, on which the working group is still continuing their work, and they intend to release these criteria in May as a supplement to the report. And this applies, for example, to activities within the realm of forestry and biodiversity, agriculture and biodiversity, but also, for example, manufacturing of chemical products and pollution, and land transportation and pollution. So yeah, in some parts the criteria there are already drafted, but just need some further work based on a first consultation. So yeah, there the work continues. At the same time, there are also other activities which are currently not undergoing any further development work, but are being considered for future work. So within that, we have land-based mining and quarrying of minerals, for example. Here, the activities have just proven particularly challenging, and our evidence is lacking. So yeah, the working group kind of like postponed working on these for now. In terms of next steps, the Commission has announced on its website that it will carefully analyze the report in due course, but again, it's important to note that the report does not bind the Commission on any decision on the matter. So now it's really up to the Commission whether or not and how to consider the platform's recommendations. I'll make a brief pause here to see whether there are any questions, but I think there are none. Of course, feel free to also pose questions later. Okay, well then I think we can move on to the next slide. And here we would like to give you a quick update on the latest developments related to corporate sustainability reporting. Thank you, Marie. And yeah, first off, as you will remember, we have the legislative process on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, which continues. And more precisely, in mid-March, the URI committee, so the responsible committee, has made its final vote on its position, and also the Council has adopted its general approach on the CSRD. So both institutions now quickly entered into the interinstitutional negotiations with the Commission, also called trilogues. And important to note, the timing of these trilogue meetings has been quite quick. So a first meeting already took place on 28th of March. The second meeting is actually taking place today, and a third one is scheduled for May. And on that note, the first of these meetings is often rather formal in nature, with everyone introducing the key issues. So we expect the actual discussions and negotiations on the individual items to start with today's meeting. Again, timeline is quite ambitious. The French Council presidency aims to conclude the file by June this year. So yeah, we'll see how that evolves. Closely linked to the CSRD is, of course, the work of the EFRAG, which has been mandated to advise the Commission by drafting the first European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So also a few words on the latest work here, as EFRAG has also been progressing quite quickly on its achievements. First, maybe more from an organizational perspective, the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board has been constituted, and the first meeting already took place end of March. There are also further meetings scheduled, one, for example, also for today and one later in April. And as you may recall from our February update, just briefly on the constituencies, the members of the board can only be nominated by EFRAG member organizations and are then represented in 3 chapters. So we have European stakeholders, national organizations, and representatives from the civil society organizations. Similarly, also the Sustainability Reporting Technical Expert Group is currently in the making and is expected to be in place by mid-April. Again, if you want to recall the structure of the EFRAG Sustainability Pillar and the interlinkages between these different bodies, I invite you to go back to our February presentation, either the slides that are on our website or the video on YouTube, where we also explain the structure more generally of EFRAG. In terms of drafting the reports, the respective project task force, the PTF ESRS, is finalizing its proposed exposure drafts and is organizing their proper handover to the Sustainability Reporting Board and the Technical Expert Group during the month of April. And once these drafts have been handed over to these 2 bodies for further scrutiny and also following a public consultation, which, by the way, is expected to be launched end of April and until the end of until end of July, sorry. Then the EFRAG is expected to deliver its final draft reporting standards by November 2022 to the Commission. And maybe also here the note that the initial deadline for this was summer 2022, so this is already delayed. That said, on the CSRD and the IFRS work, on the right-hand side, you find a few points on the latest news concerning the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the IFRS and the GI. And here, just the note, under this cooperation agreement, the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, which belongs to the IFRS, sorry, and the Global Sustainability Standards Board, the GSSB, which belongs to the GRI, will seek to coordinate their work programs and standard setting activities. And that actually also includes joining each other's consultative bodies related to sustainability reporting standards. So as was communicated in the press release, this coordination of work programs also aims to provide for these kind of like two pillars of international sustainability reporting. On the one hand side, the pillar developed by the ISSB, focusing on sustainability-related risks and opportunities, so more the financial materiality approach. And then on the other side, the pillar set by the GSSB, designed to cover companies' impacts on sustainability issues. So here, applying more the double materiality approach. And with that said, I'll quickly have a look again at whether there are any questions. The question when the Commission is expected to publish the delegated act for the remaining 4 taxonomy objectives. I'm going to virtually look over to Hugo or Federica, whether you have any indication on that yet.
Thanks, Selena. So I can, well, maybe disappoint the audience by saying we can't say precisely when the Commission will adopt the delegated act containing these technical screening criteria. Of course, the platform issued its report on the 30th of March. That was, where it shared publicly its technical screening criteria. Of course, we understand that prior to that, they had shared a few ideas with the Commission, and there had been back and forth. Ultimately, it's the discretion of the Commission what the Delegated Act actually contains in terms of the final technical screening criteria for the 4 remaining environmental objectives. And depending on how many changes they would like to make, we could see adoption today, tomorrow. Or in the weeks to come. Apologies, same issues with the headset, so I'll be quiet, but we can't say, unfortunately.
Thank you, Hugo, for tuning in on that. And I just checked, there do not seem to be any further questions on this, so I'll hand you over back to my colleague Federica for the last agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. So as you may have realized, March has been a very busy month in terms of sustainability reporting, and there were relevant developments at international level, which are absolutely worth mentioning here, yet briefly, because we are running out of time. So let's start with the ISSB. On the 29th of March, the International Sustainability Standard Board, the ISSB, published 2 exposure drafts on general sustainability-related disclosure requirements and on climate-related disclosure requirements. Just a quick reminder, the ISSB, which consolidated major international standard setter organization, has the objective to introduce a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosures on information that investors need to understand how sustainability risks and opportunities affect the enterprise value of a company. So the establishment of the ISSB was announced in November last year, and we have already seen the pre-exposure drafts of both sustainability reporting standards, both on general ones and the climate-related ones. So in terms of process, next steps, so these 2 exposure drafts were subject to consultation. So the consultation period will close on the 29th of July of this year. Then the ISSB will consider the comments and aims to finalize the standards by the end of 2022. Later this year, the ISSB also announced that it will consult on its future standard setting priorities. So we might see other topics addressed in the future. So what's interesting to keep in mind in terms of structure and contents here, the structure of both standards, the general and the climate-related ones, replicates the TCFD recommendations. So we have governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. The disclosure requirements are cross-industry, meaning that they apply to companies in all sectors. But we also have industry-based disclosure requirements that are derived directly from SASB or SASB standards. There are some changes, some amendments, for example, in the climate part, but they are mainly derived from the SASB standards, which are broadly used by companies and investors. Just another reminder that reporting requirements are not mandatory. This means that once finalized and adopted, the global baseline will need to be incorporated into jurisdictional requirements. So, of course, there are other important points to remark in terms of contents. For example, the fact that the general sustainability reporting requirements clearly said that any information required by a sustainability standard need to be disclosed as part of the company general purpose financial reporting. So sustainability related financial disclosure would be required to be published at the same time as the financial statement. And also interesting is that the proposed standard requires disclosure of material information about sustainability related risks and opportunities across a company's value chain. So value chain is mentioned. So also important to remind is that on targets and metrics in the climate standard, there are 7 cross-industry metrics with scope, including scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And also, for example, transition risks, physical risks, and climate-related opportunities. And it's also interesting, the parts on targets, because it requires clear disclosures on some characteristics of the targets, such as the objective, the metrics used to assess the progress, mention of absolute target or intensity target, and how the target compares to international agreements, such as, for example, the Paris Agreement. So as we are running out of time, I'm just very quickly covering the final topic that we have, because on the 21st of March, the US Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, which is the US government agency responsible for regulating the securities market and protecting investors, issued proposed rules to announce and standardize climate-related for publicly listed companies. So the structure also here replicates the TCFD recommendations. What's interesting to keep in mind is that companies will have to report on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and large companies will also need to get assurance for those disclosures. Scope 3 emissions would have to be reported if deemed material, or if the company has set a greenhouse gas emission reduction target that includes scope 3 categories. But the SEC has proposed an exemption from scope 3 emission disclosure requirements for smaller reportings, and there are also other exemptions or phasing rules and criteria for scope 3, because the SEC recognized that it's a challenging yet important part of company reporting. So in terms of next steps, there is a period for comments which will last on the 20th of March. If enacted by December 2022, large companies will have to report in 2024 regarding the fiscal year 2023. In 2025 regarding fiscal year 2024 on scope 2 and scope 2 assurance, and scope 3 emission, because there is a phasing approach as said. So we are approaching the end of this session together, so I will stop here, and of course maybe we can have 1 or 2 minutes to take on some questions. So I can hand over to Hugo. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just now realizing that Hugo is having some technical issues again. Sorry, just realized, just read that. So I will have the task to close this update this afternoon. So again, thank you very much for following and this webinar. Of course, if you have any further questions or clarification, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. As usual, you will find the recordings of this video and also the slides published online, but don't hesitate, please, to get in touch if you have any additional question. I am also want to thank my colleague Hugo and Selina for their updates, and also Marie, who is of course our masters, even if you can't see her. So with that said, I will give you appointment to our next webinar, which is scheduled on the 5th of May. As usual, you will just need to follow our channel on YouTube. And again, feel free to reach out by email if you have any question or comment for us. With that said, I will tell you good afternoon and see you again. Thank you for listening and watching.